Hey there, I'm Vasco, your host, and today we have quite a special episode for you. If you've looked at your podcast player, you will have noticed that this episode is quite a bit longer than usual, but that's a good thing though. Today we interview a tech leader. It can be a CTO, a VP of engineering, the kind of people we tend to work with in leadership teams. We are in the CTO series of episodes here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and this series collects first-person accounts of what it is to lead tech organizations so that we, Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, can learn about their struggles, their goals, but also what they've succeeded with and how. So grab a cup of coffee or go for a walk and make sure you check the show notes after listening to this episode, as all of those incredibly important lessons you don't want to lose will be right there, documented for your benefit. For now, let's dive into the universe of tech leaders and learn how we can help them. So come on with me. Let's listen. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special series of episodes. We're talking CTO Series here on the podcast. And joining us for today's episode is Alex Schladebeck. Hey, Alex. Welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here.
Absolutely. So Alex is the CEO and quality advocate at BREDEX GmbH in Germany. She's an agile leader with a passion for quality and human-centric development. She has a rich background in testing, product ownership, and consultancy. Now in management, Alex communicates with customers, coaches teams, and develops strategies. She's a frequent speaker at Agile events and also named most influential Agile testing professional person in 2018. She enjoys sports, music, and exploring new cultures. So, Alex, that was a short intro, of course, but let's dive into your story. Reflecting on your career, could you share a pivotal moment that defined your approach to leadership in technology?
Yeah, I think I don't think it's just one pivotal thing. I think it's a collection of patterns that I saw come up again and again. From the very beginnings, when I didn't even really know what I was seeing in technology, and then when I didn't really know what I was seeing in leadership. But I think the thing that always comes down to is this idea that we have to be communicating, that we have to talk to people. I'm learning this again and again. I'm learning it at the moment for conflict resolution, how important it is to, you can't just get everybody on one table and be like, okay, come on, everyone, let's figure this out. You have to talk to them first. You have to talk to them first. Then you have to talk to them together. And then you probably have to talk to them and then them separately again afterwards. And this is the work. The communication is the work. And I think that has just come up through technology decisions, through business decisions, strategy decisions, people decisions. That is the one thing that comes up again and again and again. And that just really, I have to carry it in front of myself as well, because sometimes, you want to kind of take the quick way. Oh, couldn't we not just get it done quickly with an email? And no, that's never the answer. You need communication. And it takes time.
And one of the things that I very often think to, this is the work of a Finnish, I would call him a business philosopher, if you will. He did a lot of work around organizations, transformation, and so on. Esko Kilpi was his name. And he talked about that the work happens in conversations and in relations, right? So that the work naturally develops in the space of those conversations we have and in the relations we form with those conversations. And one thing that you said, that it's about communication and it takes time. When you put those two together, in my mind, I translate that into this continuous conversation. Is that also how you see it?
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. And I like the idea of continuous conversation, because as well, there's definitely the part of me that likes to have things done and come out of something and be like, okay, now we have the plan. But then the world changes and somebody comes with something different, or it turns out that you misunderstood what somebody was saying. And then you have to go back a couple of steps and redo it. So yeah, I like the idea of continuous conversation. That is that's definitely a good title for how I feel I spend a lot of my time.
Yeah. And it really is, as you say, like we have this idea that we have a plan, and I have myself background in project management. So my head naturally also kind of goes into planning mode. But I do realize, just as you said, that then the world changes and then the conversation starts again, right?
Yeah. Yes. Always.
So one of these types of conversations, of course, is also aligning, I guess we could call it, tech strategy with broader business objectives while remaining agile enough to adapt to these changes that we were just talking about. So as a leader and a CEO, what are the key processes you've implemented or developed over time to ensure that we align the technology direction with the broader business objectives, but still remaining agile?
Yeah. I mean, I think if I had the actual answer to that, I could be very rich. I'll give you some things that we try and work on. So one of the things I like the way that you use the word alignment, because actually we've just moved to using OKRs, objective and key results, to be very much okay. What are the top things that we want to achieve? How are we doing that by individual contributions, by different people? Are they developers that are working on something? Are they are they maybe product owners? Or is it we all need to get better at this, or we all need to go and address this kind of a customer? And we try. I think this is one of the hard things, because the gap is between engineering teams that are like, ooh, new technology, really exciting, or sometimes new technology, terrifying and scary, right? There are different levels of that.
Both of those are good reactions depending on the context.
And from the business perspective, always asking ourselves, yes, but what do the customers need? And I had a really interesting meeting with two of my tech leaders a couple of weeks ago, because they had very, very opposing viewpoints about whether we should be using technology X or not. And one of them was very like, but hey, everyone else is using it and it's now a standard. And the other one was saying, yes, but our customers don't have the use case for it yet. And we identified that it would probably make sense that when we are responding to customer requests, like if a large customer does a request for proposal and say, okay, we need you to be able to use this technology, we need to be able to use it, obviously. So we need to make sure that we know enough about it and then find out what do they actually need and all these things. But for the other stuff, when we're doing self-hosted things, when it's not that the customer is defining the technology stack, the customer is only defining what they need done. What's the problem? That we don't have to, the only technological solution they need is the one that's good enough for them. And that doesn't necessarily always have to be what everybody else is doing. Because there's a lovely thing. We are not Spotify, we are not Netflix, right? And maybe the customers aren't that. And if they are, we need to be using those technology stacks and those processes. But if they're not, we shouldn't be using them just because. And I think that is, again, it was in the conversation. And trying to make sure that we navigate at the right speed in the right direction. And we as a company, we don't necessarily see ourselves as the first uptakers. We're not the people saying, oh, we're going to be the very first to try out this brand new technology, because that's not what our customers need. Our customers need to know this is how it works. And we don't need to be always trying out the newest things. And if they do, then we'll go and do that. That's sure.
And that story is actually quite interesting from the perspective of what we were just talking about in the previous question, which is this continuous conversation. That strikes me as one of those never-ending conversations, which for tech people can be very disturbing, because a conversation with an open end, right, that it never ends, it's always there, it can become quite unsatisfying and even frustrating for technology-minded people who want to kind of close the threads, right?
Yeah, I mean, and don't get me, I like closing threads. I like getting things done. I would also love, I think, to know that this is the answer and this is the direction that we're going in. Unfortunately, my life experiences and my job experiences have just shown me that that's just never going to happen. So, and that's why I like in terms of doing things in an agile way, in doing things in cycles, saying these are the steps that we want to take in this direction for this cycle. And then we'll reflect and see if the world has changed, or see if our understanding has changed, and see if what we learned. that if what we've learned changes or reinforces us in our direction, and we can always pivot. We can always say, "Ooh, that was the wrong direction," or "That was the right direction, but something more useful or more interesting has come up." Um, you get very used to the idea of having to navigate just a few steps in front. But the difficulty, of course, as a leader is you can't just navigate a few steps in front. You also have to be kind of looking for what else could be coming, and that's as a tester, that's a lot of unknown risks, and trying to decide which ones you look out for and what steps you take in various directions. You don't just want to be reactive, but you can't be proactive about everything because you don't have the budget capacity or anything to deal with that. And trying to get these things aligned, like I say, if I had the answer to that, I would be very rich. But I see the problem space. I'm with you in the problem space.
And I don't think that we necessarily need to close it, like in the sense that, as you said, if our time frame is short enough, we can just accept that a decision is there and we follow it. And then after the short time frame cycle, as you call it, or a sprint in Scrum terminology, we just review where we are and then we adjust, right?
I think that's the incredibly powerful thing, and I've noticed that as well. That if you know you're only committing to something for a cycle, be it 2 weeks for a Scrum team or about 3 months for an OKR cycle, it is a lot easier for people to be on board with small experiments because we know we're not committing to this for a year. We're not committing to it forever. If we find out, we had one very interesting discussion. One colleague wanted to do something by creating like a working group, and I wanted to get all kinds of people involved. And another one was like, "Oh God, that's never worked. You're just going to sit in meetings." Like, in my experience, that's never worked. And the other colleague was like, "Well, in my experience, it has." And we were able to come to the conclusion that 3 months is an okay time to try that out, to give the colleague who's responsible for it the freedom to do it how he wants, trusting that he will learn in the meantime. Like, he's not going to wait till 3 months ago, "By the way, that was a terrible idea." Like, trusting that after a month, if it's good or bad, he'll already be reflecting. But nobody is having to commit to something that they really hate for very long. Mm-hmm. And that is just especially, I have a theory that you can only become a leader, or leaders end up having egos.
Impossible to avoid, I would say.
Obviously, I think it's unfortunately one of the prerequisites. You probably didn't get here by being completely egoless, which means that once you do get here, you have to work on keeping your ego in check. And those, being able to keep your ego in check for 3 months is a lot easier than saying, "Okay, I'm gonna agree with you on this for a year or for 2 years," even though I actually don't. And that's the short iteration and quick feedback way of doing things, which I like.
And that's an example of applying that to what might be in the end quite big business decisions, like investing in a totally different management or decision-making strategy or process. But it's not just about aligning as well, right? Because it's also about creating and fostering an environment of collaboration between tech-minded people and business-minded people. So, Alex, what have you learned? I wanted to say, what have you learned about fostering that ability to collaborate between what are significant perspectives on the world, business and tech?
Yeah, I think the answer that I come up with the most, to solve would be too hard of a word, but to approach, let's go with approach. Those two perspectives is all, and this is where the business lady is slowly growing in me. Who is paying us for it? What will somebody pay us for? Because that's, it sounds crass to bring it back to that. I don't come into work only thinking this is what I'm getting paid for or anything, but to run a business, you do have to have that question in your mind of who is willing to give us money to do this. And that is often how you can manage to get the balance. Is it somebody who they really want us to go in this direction? They've decided that this is the thing they want, and that means we're going to have to make these kind of technological choices. Or is it less important which technology and more important that they get a version in the next 4 weeks, or that they have a specific way of working with us? And I think putting the customer back into that equation means that we have something that we can look at outside of our own sphere of influence. So if I'm coming from the tech side, obviously, I could invent a JavaScript framework right now, but I'm not going to try. Like, this is the new hot thing. We should be doing this because X, Y, Z, and business maybe being like, yes, but this works well enough, or we don't have those people. And then to actually take the look and say, okay, what is the benefit for the customer of doing it this way? Is there one? Will people pay us for that? And if so, hey, let's go do it. And if not, well, maybe it's not the right time, or it needs to go into the area of like innovation processes. Can we convince customers that there is a different way of doing things and that this would bring them something? But then that's more in the sorts of research and development, which of course needs to be invested in as well. But maybe it's not, customer facing from day one. So I think thinking of the customer, and I know that Agile does say some things about that as well. I think that thinking of the customer is probably a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I really liked about your answer is this finding approaches, as you called it, that allow us to step out of our natural inclination or natural perspective when it comes to thinking about a specific question, right?
Yeah, I think the use of taking different perspectives for communication as well is incredibly important. Being able to understand somebody else's perspective, even if you don't agree with it, helps a great deal.
So these are some of the strategies that you have come to rely on to allow this collaboration. But you also mentioned something that I wanted to explore a bit further, which is that we also need to invest in R&D, right? Mm-hmm. In things that are not, that customers are not willing to pay us for yet. So how do you keep that in your mind? Because at the end of the day, you also need to be thinking about the future, because business is all about preparing for what we are being asked to do in the future as well. So how do you keep that also in your vision, in your horizon as a leader?
Yeah, I think that is even harder than responding to concrete things that are happening around you. Some of the ways that we try and do that is, again, partially through, this is a little experiment that we want to do. We want to have a look at this, or maybe we have a system that runs internally that we use, and okay, what would that look like if we transferred it to this? Or what would that look like if we, added a chatbot, did more work with the data that it's producing? Sometimes it involves finding customers. I mean, that's the win-win situation. If you find a customer who's like, oh, we're interested in this, and we're like, so are we, and then you can do a pilot project together, because then you really get a lot of benefit. We do labs with customers for specific topics. So about 2 weeks. What
was that?
A lab. That's what we call it. Yeah. So like a laboratory approach. So you have either a use case or a hypothesis, and you say, okay, we're going to test this for 2 weeks. Work closely with the customer during that time, and at the end, there is some kind of learning. That learning might be, well, that was a terrible idea, but that's very, very valuable as well. The learning might be, we didn't realize that this would be an interesting aspect, and sometimes it's, hey, that's a really good thing. So we try and do things like that, and we, especially within project contexts. So in project contexts that are already running. I don't advocate for us consistently changing the front end technology every 2 weeks. That would be an awful idea. But things like adding new toolings, using the latest version of Cypress, that means that you can do component tests in the front end as well, or adding the smaller level innovations that can happen within a project. I think that it's really important for tech people and for engineers to have that freedom to do that, because I think that's really where they have the space. It's something that we can test out in the project context. Does this bring us some more value? Yes, no. But it's not changing the general structure, architecture, or tech stack of the project on a weekly basis, because those are generally things that aren't going to bring the customer any extra benefit unless they've specifically said, this tech stack isn't working for us anymore. We need to move to this one, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that idea of creating the space for tech people to innovate, to try out new things, even within their sprint cycle. I think that's a great idea. Also having clear, I'd say, boundaries about what we don't experiment with in sprint cycles, like changing the UI technology as an example. So we've talked about road mapping, collaboration, and alignment. And we've heard some of the solutions that you approach those challenges with. But if I would have to ask you, Alex, what was the biggest challenge you faced in your career as a leader? What was that?
You mean like this week? Or
I like the answer. I like the answer. All right, let's go with this week.
I don't. So okay, I mean, I think I actually can give. I think the biggest challenge for me so far has been making the step from being a team lead to being a CEO. I am in my 5th year. I'm very, very lucky that there are 2 of us that run the company, and my co-CEO Andreas, he has been doing it for a good while longer than me. So I definitely had someone that I could look at, that I could ask, how do we do this or whatever. But this is where we get to a topic that's very, very close to my heart. There is no guidebook for this. We do not talk about how you make these decisions or how you deal with situation X. And of course, we don't. There can't be a guidebook because it's very complex. And there are probably no right or wrong answers in a lot of senses. It's just what you do with the situations that you're given. But it's very much a black box. Being responsible for everything. But also, if you make yourself responsible for everything, you're a horrible micromanaging monster. So you have to be kind of responsible for everything from the sidelines, but then sometimes be very active when necessary. And I actually currently have a whiteboard, a mind map on my whiteboard, and the title of the mind map is "What am I doing?" This is not to. It's a
very important question for anyone, but definitely for leaders, for sure.
This is not to terrify colleagues into thinking that I do not know what I'm doing. It is my attempt to categorize and label some of the activities that I do as a leader in order to be able to talk to people about how I'm doing them or what I'm doing or what context I'm letting come into my decisions. Because how am I supposed to train new leaders, or how are people supposed to maybe learn to become more enabled to make decisions without me being there if they don't know how I make the decision? And not in the sense of I have to learn to decide like Alex, but learning to decide, learning how to deal with situation like this or like this or like this. And that is something that the best analogy I have, and this is where I came up with it, it comes from exploratory testing or people debugging. If you look at an exploratory tester or somebody debugging and they're not telling you what they're doing, it looks like black magic. And if you say, I want to be better at exploratory testing or I want to be better at debugging, then probably those people will tell you, get experience, work on your intuition. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great advice.
Yeah, work on intuition is the best answer always.
Yeah, how did you find that? Yeah, experience and intuition. Awesome, cool, I can learn that. And I'm a very firm believer that if we talk about things that we're doing and explain, it's somewhere between debugging your leadership, explainable leadership, and Elizabeth Grober helped me come up with this title a little while ago. It's something like leadership observability. How can you know what's going on in my head? And that's something I'm really excited about at the moment, because I've been going through this where I'm like, I don't know how to decide this. I don't even know how to approach this decision. I don't even know what the steps are. And now slowly I'm starting to notice patterns. I'm starting to notice things that I've messed up, things that I've maybe done well. And I'm trying to start to describe frameworks in which people could start labeling and describing this for themselves and for other people so that we can open up the conversation about that.
Yeah, and that's actually the key, right? Like opening up the conversation. I have to say that I prefer debug your leadership, but because you're a tester and have tech background, I understand why leadership observability
It
would
sounds
be.
sexy. Come on,
It
everyone loves
does.
observability. Like, yeah,
Everybody, right? And the test mindset, I'm sure, even
yeah.
kind of crystallizes to that word even better. I do prefer debug your leadership though, but that's just my opinion. I was just thinking that it really is about opening up the black box of leadership, and through reflecting it for others, also learning to reflect on it by yourself, right? And that is so important, because I was just thinking, like, one of the things we do here on the podcast is that we organize conferences online and in person, and the attempt with those type of events is really to allow members of the community to share their perspective so that we can learn together, right? Like, that's the whole idea. It's like learn together. It's not about being taught, it's about sharing to learn, because then you have questions and answers and so on. And when we were just talking about conversations and then leadership observability and how that makes it transparent, or hopefully makes it transparent for others, it reminds me that one of the key aspects of that conversation, that transparency, is also to create empathy between the person you're leading, because at the end you're a leader in any case. I mean, we all are to some extent, but of course CEOs are even more in that kind of position than others in the company. And I was just thinking, like, how do you feel that? Because you're looking at it as a leader now, but you have been a coach before as well. So how do you look at that dynamic between the people who do the work and the leaders, and how to create empathy between both, in both directions?
Yeah, I think so. The anecdote I have for this is that I was like, oh, as a tester, nobody likes testers. No, I spent a lot of my life trying to convince people that testers are useful and testers are cool and they just want to help you. And I think I had this lovely naive idea that when I became a leader, that would change. Lol. I think I just choose the jobs that everyone's like, no, we don't like them. It is close to my heart to get the message out there that, like, leaders are people too. And I know that there are plenty of bad examples of leaders and managers. Like, I am aware of that. And probably even in my career, I've been one of them. Like, let's not, right? Maybe even this week, who knows? But I like to keep learning. And I think, so there's a couple of things that I use. I think the first one is sharing your working, saying, like, this is why I like the term observability, by the way, because I like the idea that narrating your thought process is a little bit like adding logs to them. That's why, but you might say breakpoints, but that's cool. Anyway, we won't go down that road. I'm still exploring around this thing. It's super exciting. So the explaining of how I get to my decision. I think the important thing, though, and I'm still working on my formulation for this, there has to be a sentence or a couple of sentences, like, me explaining it to you is not necessarily an invite for your feedback on it. Without that sound, like, again, ego. Of course, if someone's like, yeah, but have you thought of this? Of course I want to know. But sometimes if people explain things, we think that means that they are unsure. Whereas actually, and I mean, let's face it, I'm always unsure. Everybody always is. But it's not always an invitation to change my decision. It's just the input. And I think the other thing is that sometimes when you explain these things, you have to be okay that the person will still not like it and will be disappointed. Because there's the hope, if you explain something that they understand it, there's the hope that they're like, okay, I understand, but I don't like it. But sometimes they don't understand and they don't like it. And you have to be okay with that. That's a thing that I'm still very much working on. And the other thing that I have for people who don't get to have those conversations with their leaders yet is, if you think that your leader has made a terrible decision, play the thought of experiment of, next to which other decisions did this one seem like the best? What was the context that led to this crappy decision being the best of a bad bunch? Because that's usually how decisions have to work. It's never as easy as just being like, oh, that's the obvious, right, easy, money-making, secure, bringing whatever decision. It's always a toss-up between various, and this is where it gets interesting. This is where the fun with the explaining or with the making it tangible comes, between various unknown risk factors that we're having to weigh up to get to where we are. So I think that even just having that, even playing that thought experiment of my boss made a terrible decision, they're an idiot. Maybe maybe they are an idiot. Let's not, but like
we all are at some point, right? Nobody's perfect.
exactly. But maybe there were other things. Maybe that was the best thing that they could, or even to ask yourself, there's a lovely saying, there are no overreactions, just reactions in context. And to ask yourself, which context would lead to this decision being the one that made the most sense? And of course, the context can be my boss is an idiot, but maybe there's another one. And so I try and foster that curious mindset as much as I can, and I try and do the work of telling people how I got to decisions as much as I can as well. I think I'm still very much on the beginning of that. Like I'm definitely not a guru here. Definitely not an expert yet, but it's something that's just really dear to me. So I work on it a lot.
Absolutely. And I'm sure when you are ready to share some of those details with the world, I would like to get you back for a bonus episode on leadership observability.
Yeah, I'm actually hoping to talk about it for the first time at a conference at the end of this year. So let's see.
Absolutely. Now, there's a few questions that I want to explore a little bit more. The first one is, I guess, one that you would be expecting to get anyway. What are some of the KPIs or key performance indicators that you use to measure the success of the engineering part of your organization? And how do you align those KPIs with the overall company goals?
Ooh, that's a hard one. So first of all, I know this is a terrible quality to have as a CEO, but I don't love numbers. I am aware of their use for some things, but I'm very careful with them. I will try and answer the question, but I'll tell you my favorite example of a KPI that I ever had, which was I was dealing with a project that was in a horrible escalation. I was brought in. Nobody trusted anybody. Emails were being sent all over the place on the customer side, and I was brought in to help. I felt very unqualified to do this, but that's how life is. And I was having a conversation with the basically my counterpart on the other side. And I'd been told that this person loved numbers and loved KPIs, and he was going to want measurable things about how I've improved his project. And I'm like, well, okay, but like how? Lines of code, test cases, like what? I don't even know. I was chatting with him, and I'd said to him, "So I know I'm aware that you want some numbers, but let me get some more context first, and then I'll try and figure something out." And later on in the conversation, he just said, "Do you know what? I just want to stop being invited to escalation meetings." And I was like, that is our KPI. I can't gamify it. I can't force the people on the other side to not escalate. The only thing that I can do is make sure that they trust me enough to escalate it to me instead of to you, and that they have fewer reasons to escalate. I was like, that is our KPI. And that remains one of, I think, the highlights of my career of when I figured out how to use a number in a good way. As a company, we have KPIs like, they're the usual ones. They're like, how much is our billability? What's our, it's German, Deckungsbeitrag, and I do not know that word in English. Basically, I really do not know that word in English. We can Google it later. It's sort of hourly rates if you take away costs for this and costs for that, or if you include the costs. Wow, it's been a while since I found something that I didn't know in my native language. Okay, so of course we have things like that, or we have like, I don't know, how many people are off, all of these kind of things. That, of course, though, if you try and just gamify those, that's not going to lead to better engineering things. So I tend to try and leave what the teams need within the teams. We have good project leads who have an eye on things like that. And I only kind of try and join in on that if it's really necessary, and if it is necessary for the shortest possible time, because there is no bigger red flag than the CEO having to join your retro. Like I've had to do it a few times because this is the politics of these kind of situations. If the customer comes to me and is unhappy, I can't tell them to take a chill pill and the project lead will deal with it. That is not how that game works. I have to be physically present and go to the project team and say, sorry, I hate having to do this. It's all kinds of wrong, but I have to play this game. Let's have a chat. That usually works. And I think I love the idea of using the DORA metrics, but we're not most of our customers aren't in the business that they have continuous deployments and frequent things like that. So we don't really use those yet. So I think the answer might be I don't know, which I'm okay with.
And one of the things that you said, like being aware of how the context is influencing the teams and the customer relationships, for example. And of course, there's in your kind of business, obviously, if you're a consulting company, there are metrics that are kind of universal. You have to look at them just to make ends meet anyway, right? Like those are the things that you could call them weather metrics, right? Like you can't do anything like about it, but you better know them. I really like this idea that if there are metrics that are relevant for the team, I trust the team to take care of those metrics, and I think that's a really great perspective, because at the end of the day, as leaders, if we don't step back, the teams will never take ownership, right? Then otherwise we would be doing our work plus the work of all of the team members that are inside the team. All right, and the next question is, of course, consulting has its own challenges, not the least of which one that you've mentioned already, to be how do you call it? To be up to date with the latest trends, whether you take them or not, it's a different question. So how do you yourself, as the leader of the organization, how do you stay up to date with industry trends, emerging technologies, and of course, best practices in software engineering?
Yeah, so first of all, I try and delegate as much of that as I can, because I personally cannot be up to date with everything. That's why we have like, so our, we're quite flat in our hierarchy. We have the CEOs, we have team leads, and then everybody else. And there are expectations that team leads are up to date on things, that they also go to conferences, that they also have their networks. We try and encourage that as much as we can for all of the employees. So there are some things like conference watch parties that everybody watches, and people are encouraged to bring things to. Me personally, I still go to conferences. I am in a few very, very good Slack groups. I have a few people who I know I can be like, can you explain to me what this is? I do quite a lot of pairing with specifically one of my team lead and developer friends, so that we work on small things, or we go and look at a platform, or I call it that I'm a developer, because I personally can't write a great deal of code. I would never say I'm a developer, but if you put me with a developer in a pairing situation, I'm pretty good at it. So I try and do as much of that as I can. And yeah, conversations in the kitchen, listening to things, asking. I'm just curious. I think sometimes the question comes like, how did you get from being a linguistics graduate to the CEO of of an IT company? And the easiest answer I can come up with is that I'm really curious and I don't keep my mouth shut. And that I try and keep on to that I'm still allowed to ask stupid questions, that I'm still allowed to be like, I didn't understand that. Can somebody else explain it to me? And then, of course, we do have things that we bring in, like via strategic work. I just had a really exciting presentation of somebody who'd been looking at Copilot. And they've been looking at it for a couple of weeks. That was a specific innovation thing that we said. They gave us a presentation, and I'm like, that's really exciting. Let's go and look at that. So sometimes it's about delegating it, and sometimes it's about going and looking at yourself. The difficulty of going and looking at yourself now is that I mean, this has always been the case. When I tried to bring ensemble programming into the company in 2015, because I'd been at a conference and I tried it out for the first time and I loved it. And I did a couple of workshops. I used the power that I had within my teams to do it. And it didn't really catch on. Nobody was really, really excited. It caught on when I brought in an external expert to tell other people. That was Amitai Schleier. I'm so grateful that he came. It was amazing. But then people are coming to me like, hey, Alex, have you heard about ensemble programming? I'm like, yes, I have.
That is humbling,
or sometimes
I'd
be like, no, I haven't. Tell me about this wonderful new thing. And that's fine. I get called in as the external expert to other people who would be just as qualified as saying it. So sometimes I always have to plant seeds. The likelihood of me being like, this is really great, let's get people together to do this. I might not have the time, and for some reason, I'm just not believable. So I have to do it in a stealthy way, which is why it's a good idea to have other people helping you.
Yeah, absolutely. The external credibility and also authority is definitely.
Nobody believes me. Like,
yeah. It's
I think.
in Portugal we have a saying: home saints don't do miracles, right? Like it has to be a
I
foreign
love that.
saint.
Yes. Oh, that's brilliant. That's yeah. I completely get that. Yeah. Like I try and explain, like, you do realize that I am to some degree, like, here's my ego again, but some people would say I'm one of the world's experts on this. No, no, not you. Not you. No, no, no.
I know what you
People
mean.
pay me to go to conferences. I get to do podcasts. No, Alex, you have no idea. And of course, it's never quite the conversation is never quite that obvious, but somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And you did introduce in this answer something that is really important. Like when we talk about best practices in software engineering, especially in technology companies, we do have to understand that we that are on the inside of these companies, it might be quite difficult for us to bring new ideas, even if we have them. But by going outside, we can bring in externals who can help, as you said, plant the seed, right?
Exactly.
And then we can support it. All right. And last question for you as a CEO, which is, what was the book that most influenced your approach to that role?
I'm gonna. The first book that came to mind when I saw that question, when you say this question, is How to Speak So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. I am not a parent. I am a very involved auntie of lots of tiny humans. And I'm very interested in communication. And one of my parent friends lent this book to me at some point. And about basically the first 3 chapters are, it's basically like, if a child says they're hungry or they're angry, don't convince them that they're not hungry or they're not angry. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes told that they don't feel the feelings that they have. Like, meet them where they are, accept that that's what they're feeling, and then see where you can work from that. And people don't like talking to you if they feel that they're being blocked or not heard. It turns out that children are just small humans, or humans are just big children, depending on which way, like adults are just big children, depending on which way you look at it. I mean, I have a list of books that I recommend to people, like Radical Candor. Never Split the Difference is also a really good one, specifically because it has a lot of callbacks to turns out that dealing with terrorists and dealing with children is relatively similar.
Oh my God.
Actually, I have a slide that I sometimes do with quotes from both books, and you're supposed to tell me whether it's about dealing with children or dealing with terrorists. People do not get this right.
That's a nice research to do, by the way.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things, but I think for the general understanding that we are working with humans in socio-technical systems, we have to be working with the humans. And it's hard, it's frustrating. And there are some times, especially as a leader, where you realize you're coming up against what you can do as a person, because the person might need somebody external to talk about, or they might have problems that the company can't help with. And that is definitely a thing that I still struggle with, because I'm, in the positive and negative sense, I'm a very empathetic person. Like, it's good sometimes, but of course, there are sometimes things where I have to say, I understand that I can't help you with this, and I still have difficulty with that. So there's lots of books, but if the How to Speak So Kids Will Listen, Talk So Kids Will Listen, and Listen So Kids Will Talk it's definitely a highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put the link to all of those books in the show notes for sure. The Never Split the Difference has been referred to on the podcast before, but How to Talk to Kids So Kids Will Listen, and Listen to Kids So That They Will Talk, that has never been referred to on this podcast.
Saying, for the record, I am not saying that my employees are children. That is not what I'm saying.
No, in fact, you said we all are kind of a little bit internally still children, and maybe when we were children, we were already at that time a little bit adults already. And I think that's beautiful, because one of the things that I struggle with is exactly this idea that somehow when you change from being a child to an adult, you completely change. Like, how is that possible? We're still the same people. We're just a collection of experiences over time. We change every day if we want to go that far, but there are things that remain with us forever, if you will.
I think I mean, this is where it gets into sort of therapy territory, which I've done my fair share of as well. But like, it's important to know these things. I often talk to colleagues if we're in meetings and it's getting like there's a conflict. I will be the first one to say, look, people are raising their voices. That is a thing that I know makes me uncomfortable. It makes me less, it puts me, I know why that comes from my childhood. Like, I won't go into it, like, but I have experiences in my childhood that means that I hate having the feeling that I'm being shouted at. And so it will be easier for all of us if we take a breath, take a bit of a break, and remember that we're trying to fix the problem and not attack each other. And I'm still that child. I'm still that child that doesn't want to be shouted at. Like, and I think it's super important. I would love to send all leaders to therapy. That is the thing that I would love to do.
Second that. I second that. I've been in therapy for many years, and I have grown very much as a person and learned a lot about how I deal with others and relating to this. As you said, this socio-technical system, it's in the end, we work with technology, but we work with people first. And in the end, as leaders, then they are the ones who end up working with technology. We don't do that much anymore. So I think that's a perfect ending to this conversation. Really a pleasure to have you here. Alex, before we go though, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the company I work for is called BREDEX. We said at the beginning, you can go to BREDEX DE to find out a bit more about what we do. You can see what kind of things I talk about personally on schladebeck.de. I keep a list of where I've been and what I do, so I know what I've been up to. I'm going to be at Hustev this year in Budapest. I'm the program chair, and I'll be giving a keynote, probably on leadership observability. That's exciting. And I'll be at Agile Testing Days if you want to catch up with me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on it's not Twitter anymore. I'm on X, I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Mastodon. And I'm on LinkedIn. So I think I'm pretty findable.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to all of those on the show notes to make sure that people have an easy time finding Alex. And why not ask a few follow-up questions? I'm sure there's many in your mind as you listen to this. Alex, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh boy, I bet you are buzzing with ideas after listening to this episode. I know I was. Now, there are so many ways we can help the leaders we work with, so I hope this episode helped you get some of those ideas going and getting inspired, hopefully also to take action. That's what matters in the end, don't forget that. Now, if you want to check out the key lessons from this episode, check out the show notes at scrummastertoolbox.org. But for now, I'll say goodbye and see you in the next episode. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.